Hi to everybody who's logging in. Thank you for joining us for today's Grow Native webinar. We'd like to begin by thanking all of our program sponsors for 2025, which you can view on the slide here. We'll begin this webinar in just a moment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and more people will join us as we continue. Good afternoon, and welcome to our Grow Native webinar, Take a Virtual Native Home Garden Tour with Carol Davit. My name is Amanda Lance Bramrup, and I am the Events and Communications Coordinator for the Missouri Prairie Foundation and Grow Native program. Thank you for joining us for the next webinar in our 2025 series. Today's presentation features a pre-recorded video with MPF's Executive Director, Carol Davit. It was filmed this summer by MPF's Director of Operations, Emily Gustafson, at Carol's residence in Jefferson City, Missouri. Carol is here with us for a live Q&A after the video, which will be facilitated by Emily. During the video presentation, if you have any questions for Carol, please put them in the Q&A section on your Zoom screen, which you will find on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom window. Any questions placed in the chat will need to be relocated to that Q&A section. Thank you in advance. All the questions will be read aloud and answered following the presentation's conclusion. This webinar is being recorded, and the link will be shared with all of you tomorrow, along with resources mentioned during the presentation and Q&A session. I will hop back on to wrap everything up near the top of the hour. Now, a little background on Carol. Carol is the executive director of the 59-year-old Missouri Prairie Foundation and Grow Native, its 25-year-old native plant marketing and education program. She has worked for 27 years in conservation and environmental communications, development, administration, and leadership for private and nonprofit conservation groups, and also municipal and state governments. She is also the chair of the Missouri Invasive Plant Council and so much more. For more details, please visit our staff page next time you're online. We are excited to have Carol share her extensive native landscaping knowledge with us today and give us a sneak peek of what life's like over in her side of the world.
My name's Carol Davit. I'm the director of the Missouri Prairie Foundation and the Grow Native program, and I am standing in my front yard in Jefferson City, and I am pleased to give you a tour of my native yard. My husband and I moved here in 2006, and I have been establishing native beds over that time. Some of the beds here have been here for 15 years, some are only 1 year old. And whether you are a seasoned native landscaper or you are just starting out thinking of adding some native plants to your landscaping, I hope that what I show you today may be of use to you. We have 2 mature white oak trees in our front yard, so the front yard is mostly shady. And everything that we've added here in the landscaping is native. Since we've lived here, there were arborvitae and boxwoods in front of the house, which are still here today. If you choose to landscape with native plants, you don't have to remove the non-native plants that were in your landscaping to begin with, although if you have invasive plants, I would highly recommend that you do that. But you can add native plants to a non-native landscape. In my case, I choose to plant all native plants because all of these plants have a job to do. I want them to work for me. They are providing food sources for native insects, songbirds. They are supporting nature's web of life. I also choose native plants because I think they're beautiful and I think they're endlessly fascinating and they belong here, so I think they're the logical choice for landscaping. On my street, there is a lot of car traffic and foot traffic along the sidewalk right in front of my yard. So I wanted the front yard to be as manicured as possible to make the landscaping look attractive, especially to people who might not be accustomed to native landscaping. I've chosen several native ground covers, including pussy toes, and this species is Antonaria parlinii. And also robin's plantain or Erigeron pulchellus. And then I've chosen a number of other plants that are rather tidy in the way that they grow. They don't spread very much or not at all, including alum root. The scientific name is Heuchera richardsonii. If you have canopy trees and lawn, I highly recommend that you consider establishing some native beds under the canopy trees. You can add understory trees, shrubs, wildflowers, sedges, grasses that like shade, and then you will provide layers of landscaping that will benefit insects and other creatures throughout the year. And if you don't have shade, we have in the Grow Native, the Grow Native website, we have a transitional shade garden plan so that you it has information about recommendations on canopy trees to plant, as well as understory, shrub, and wildflowers to plant, so that you have shade over time, and the plants in the plan can tolerate part sun, part shade, so they are adaptable to the changing shade conditions of your yard. And we have garden plans for existing shady areas as well as that traditional shade garden plan. This robin's plantain is a nearly evergreen ground cover that has daisy-like flowers in early spring, and having those early blooming plants is so important for pollinating insects that are just emerging in the spring season. And here I have planted star tickseed or Coreopsis pubescens in with the robin's plantain so that I have something blooming later in the season. And I also have a number of plants of alum root. This species here is Heuchera richardsonii, and you can see this individual has variegated leaves and this does not, but they're the same species. That's just some natural variation in the species. A small tree that I added to our yard that you might like to try as well is fringe tree. It has beautiful white filamentous flowers in the spring, and it can get probably twice the size and maybe twice the width of the individual tree that you see here, but it's one of a number of smaller trees that are ideal for small landscapes. We have a number of resources on the Grow Native website to help you choose understory small native trees for your landscape. We have top 10 lists about native, small native trees, and also our native plant database. You can select trees using our searchable database. You can search on size and spread of plants, including trees. A shrub for shade that you might want to try is wild hydrangea, and I planted this individual a couple of years ago, so it's still relatively small and it hasn't bloomed yet, but I'm hoping next year it will. It has flat-topped white clusters of flowers that are very attractive to many different kinds of pollinating insects. Another area of my landscaping that I wanted to share are my native containers, and I really love gardening with native containers, putting native plants in pots, either one species per pot or several species per pot. And here I have a grouping of 3 different native plants, and these are all spring blooming plants. We have Indian pink, our Spigelia marylandica, which just finished blooming in May. We have Solomon seal here, or Polygonatum biflora, and Jacob's ladder, or Polemonium reptans. And these two, the Solomon seal and the Jacob's ladder, bloomed earlier, but you can see that the foliage still looks very nice. So if you choose spring blooming plants for container gardens, choose ones where the foliage is going to look nice throughout the summer. And what I do with these containers is at the end of the summer, when the foliage has died back, I bring a wheelbarrow up here and I put the plants with the pots and all, and I move them to a leaf pile in my backyard. I cover them with leaves to insulate the pots, insulate the roots, and I overwinter them that way. And then in the spring I bring them out and I tidy them up and put them back on my porch. And these are perennial plants, so they come back. This Indian pink plant, for example, is at least 8 years old in the same pot. So choosing perennials for these containers is more sustainable. You don't have to continually be buying annuals to put in pots, and it's less expensive. If you don't have a backyard or a leaf pile, you can also try leaving them on your porch. I do know of other gardeners who do that and have no problem at all. But containers are another way to enjoy native plants, especially if you don't have a yard, if you have a patio or a balcony or a front porch. And it's a way to simply have more plants because there's so many wonderful native plants to use. For example, if you have heavy deer pressure in your area, having some natives in containers on your porch might shelter them from the deer. Some other plants species that I have tried successfully in pots are what you see here. We have rock pink. This is a Talinum species native to certain glades. It's a succulent and it has beautiful pink blossoms that really bloom for quite a long time over the summer. And I have false aloe here, which is an incredibly cool looking, very bold plant. This has been in the same pot for at least 8 years, so it's an older plant, and you can see, over time I would have 1 flowering stalk, then 2, then 3, and this year I have 5 flowering stalks. And in the same pot with it, I have calamint, which is in the mint family, and it's very fragrant, and it has beautiful lavender flowers that bloom for quite a long time in the summer. And I like to contrast different foliage types in containers, either in the same pot or next to each other for that visual contrast. This is a native sedum. It's called wild stonecrop. And that also works well in a pot. And for these species, I use dirt in my yard with some compost. But for these Glade species, that like dry, well-drained soil, I will add some gravel and sand to help the water drain well in those pots. Another plant that you can try in a container or along the edge of a wall, as I've done, or in a really dry, sunny area, is prickly pear. This is one of the prickly pear species that's native in Missouri, and this is the first time it's bloomed for me. I've had this plant here for I think about 3 or 4 years, and it's finally old enough. It's in an area of part sun, part shade, so it's not in its native growing conditions. And because it hasn't had full sun, that may be why it's taken a while to bloom. But they're absolutely gorgeous flowers. And as I mentioned, these would do great in a rock garden, a glade garden, or in a pot with very well-drained soil. The third area of my native landscaping that I wanted to share is my prairie garden, which is a border garden along one side of my driveway. And I established this with container plants in 2009. This originally, when we moved in 2007, this was a bare soil with 2 dying yews and a railroad tie retaining wall that was threatening to fall over into the neighbor's driveway. So we pretty soon had that retaining wall removed with a new wall put in, and when the new wall was put in, there was new soil that was put in. So we were really fortunate that we were starting with bare soil. And I selected different species of grasses and wildflowers native to prairies, 80 small plants total, and I arranged them with taller plants generally in the back. And but a lot has changed over the years. There are plants here that were abundant that are no longer here. There are certain plants that have been pretty assertive and have taken over more of the space than I had anticipated. A couple of lessons learned here that might help you, depending on the kind of garden look that you want to achieve, is had I known how rapidly the grasses would spread, I would have cut the number of plants I installed by half. And I would have done the same thing with aromatic aster, or Cynthiatrichum oblongifolium. It's a wonderful aster. I love it. It blooms profusely in the fall, but it's really assertive and it can crowd out other plants. In the early years of this planting, I did selectively pull out some seedlings, but looking back, I should have done more of that. And I do go through and edit or remove or trim some plants over the season. I will cut back vegetation that flops, but other than that, we leave all of the vegetation here. After the plants die back, we leave all of that over the course of the winter to provide a refuge for insects, birds, and we would much rather look at that interesting vegetation, the dead stalks and the grasses over the winter than we would just bare soil. Sometimes with native landscaping, there might be a misconception that it's really hands-off, but really nothing could be further from the truth. Just like conventional landscaping with non-native plants, you can apply horticultural practices, and you should. You can cut plants back so that they are more compact and less leggy. You can deadhead if you want to prevent self-seeding of plants that spread prolifically by seeds. Just know that if you do that, you will be eliminating seed sources for birds. But you can implement these practices. And for example, something that I do in the prairie garden is I trim back the showy goldenrod like you see here. So I cut this back in May because I want more compact plants. And you can see here that since I've cut it back, vegetation is resprouting. Now, the flower heads of this will be smaller than if I hadn't cut it back, but that is the compromise that I want to make to have more compact plants. And there will still be plenty of floral resources for pollinating insects when this blooms in early fall. One thing that I think is really fun to incorporate into native landscaping are a few plants that are really dramatic and bold that help focus your eye in a planting. And two that I especially like are in my prairie garden. One is compass plant, which is grown so tall with all of the rain that it's now leaning, as you can see. This is Silphium laciniatum. And then I have another species of Silphium as well, prairie dock, which is Silphium terebinthinaceum, and it has these really bold, large basal leaves, and it will bloom later this summer, and you can see the flowering stalk there starting to grow skyward. So we do like to leave this vegetation in place over the winter, the dead vegetation, although we do trim things if they're flopping or fall into the neighbor's driveway. But we leave the spent vegetation mostly intact. One, we think it's more attractive to look at than just bare soil. And second, we want to have that those standing dormant grasses and the spent flower stalks for refugia in the wintertime for birds and maybe insects. And then in the early spring, we cut this back, but we leave many stems of wildflowers intact. We trim them to like 8 to 24 inches tall. And we do that so that stem nesting bees can use those as nest sites in the following growing season. The fourth area of my native landscaping that I wanted to share is my Glade garden. And this is the area in front of our house, between the house and the driveway. And when we moved here, the only thing that was in this area was gravel and a very shallow layer of terrible soil under it. But rather than improve the soil, I decided to work with what we had. And that's what's so wonderful about native plants. If you have moist soil, you can use plants native to wetlands. If you have dry and rocky soil, which is the case here, you can use plants native to glades, native to those growing conditions, and they actually thrive in those conditions. So I purchased seed from a Grow Native professional member of a mix of species that thrive in dry, rocky sites. So I established this initially from seed in about 2009, I believe. And it took about 2 to 3 years, and then I started having the pale purple coneflower, or Echinacea pallida, starting to bloom. There are more of these now after all of those years of this coneflower self-seeding. So, and I was very pleased. I'm not concerned about this one becoming overly dominant because it's a slender plant and it leaves plenty of room for other plants. Then over time, I have added a number of species in container plants, basically because I can't help myself. There are just so many wonderful plants that I want to see and that I want to grow. One of them is the blue false indigo, the Baptisia australis, and it bloomed in April, and you can see the seed pods forming here from the pollinated blue-purple flowers. This plant is, as I said, blooms in April, and it's especially beneficial for bumblebees and other pollinators that have recently emerged from their nests, and they are hungry and they need food. And so this plant is wonderful at providing them with food. If you have really dry, rocky soil like I do, and you want to add container plants, I highly recommend using the smallest plants you can find, simply because it will be easier to dig the holes. You don't have to, in some cases, you just don't have very much soil or loose enough rock to deal with, and the smaller the plant, it makes it easier for you. One of the plants that was in the seed mix that I used to establish this Glade garden is Illinois bundleflower, or Desmanthus illinoisans. And I really love this plant, especially for the fine foliage. I think it's really beautiful. It's in bud, and these buds will turn into small spherical flower heads. But you can see there's quite a bit of it here. So one of the stewardship techniques that I use for the Glade garden is I let this bloom because I enjoy seeing the flowers and I want those floral resources to be available for pollinating insects. But after that, I will pull it out or I will cut it out. And that way some of the other plants get more sun and they're more visible. The last area of my yard that I wanted to share are my native vines. And I am a huge advocate of landscaping with native vines. I think they're underutilized, but native vines provide literally another dimension of native landscaping. You can literally go vertical. And so I have several species of native vines on this privacy fence. I love that in many places all you see are the vines, and in some places it's hard to see the wood fence. Some of the vines that I have here are Dutchman's pipevine. This is Aristolochia tomentosa, and this is the host plant for the pipevine swallowtail butterfly. And it's really fun to be out here and see the adult female pipevine swallowtails flying around, laying their eggs, and then coming out here and finding the little caterpillars and watching them get bigger, and then watching them crawl away to form a chrysalis. Another vine that I have here is cross vine. In Missouri, it is native to the boot heel, and it has incredibly beautiful sort of salmon and yellow tubular flowers in the spring. One thing I wanted to note about certain vines like the Dutchman's pipevine, it is quite aggressive, and this is many years old now, and you can see how large the vine has gotten. So it's important when you select different species of vines to keep in mind how tall and big it can get over time to make sure you have a sturdy enough support for it. There are other vines that are much more delicate, like this yellow passion flower. And we have two different species of native passion flowers in Missouri. And this is a one with about quarter-sized yellow fringed flowers, incredibly delicate and intricate. And you can see here that this is just full of buds, and it is so fun to come out here and see. There's a small wasp that will walk in a circle over those fringed petals collecting pollen. You can use native vines on chain link fence, on wooden privacy fences, on any kind of support system. You can also use them as ground covers. You can let them trail across the ground, and they will cover the ground and form ground covers. I hope that the tour of my yard has piqued your interest, or maybe given you some new ideas about how to use native plants on your own property. In addition to what you may have learned from this video, we have hundreds of free resources at grownative.org to help you explore native plants and learn about which ones are right for your particular situation. We have, for example, an article about how to establish a prairie garden. In fact, it's an article that shows the step-by-step process I took to create this border prairie garden. If you're interested in learning more about gardening with native vines, we have an article all about gardening with native vines that includes information about different vines to use according to how tall they get, if they need sun, shade, etc. If you're interested in gardening with Glade plants, we have a rock garden native garden design template that may give you some additional ideas of gardening with sun, dry, loving plants. Our native plant database has about 300 native plant species, and it's searchable, so it's an incredibly useful tool. So, for example, suppose you love white flowers and you have shade. You can click on our different search criteria, white flowers, shade, and then you'll instantaneously get a list of plants that are suitable for those conditions. And we have other criteria for size of plant, the kinds of wildlife or insects that those plants might attract, and many other search criteria. We have top 10 lists. If you're just getting started and you're feeling overwhelmed, you don't want to learn maybe about 370 native plants, but you would like to learn about 10 plants, for example, for a particular landscaping situation. We also have webinars and master classes that are broadcast every other week. You can register for them, learn more about them at grownative.org. And the webinars are also available at the Missouri Prairie Foundation's YouTube channel as well. So we invite you to learn from these resources and many more, and we wish you very happy native gardening.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful tour of your yard, Carol. Just a reminder to folks, we have a number of questions already in the Q&A, and we will get to as many of those as we can. But if you do have additional questions, please type those into the Q&A section on your Zoom screen. And if there's anything that we don't end up getting to in our discussion, we'll make sure to have some answers for you in the follow-up email that we will send tomorrow, which will include a link to a recording of this webinar. I did want to mention we had a couple of questions asking for a plant list for the plants featured in this video and in Carol's yard, and we will include that in our follow-up email tomorrow. So Carol, I will get started with a few questions. So the first is, do you recommend any plants that would do well under walnut trees?
Thanks. Yeah, I took a sneak peek and I saw that. That's an excellent question, and I am not an expert on that. However, I've been Googling and I did just find what looks to be a really great resource from the Morton Arboretum in Chicago about black walnut toxicity. And I'll put that link in the chat real quick, and maybe that can go out with the email too. But I also saw that it looks like even though black walnuts exude that natural chemical that can inhibit growth of certain plants, that actually seems like quite a few native plants can tolerate it from what I'm reading. But I will say I have a black walnut in our backyard, and I haven't done any intensive native gardening back there because we have a lot of deer, and that's where the highest deer pressure is. But I do have a red buckeye that has self-seeded under the walnut, and it's doing just fine. So that's one that, in my experience, works well. But as I said, the Morton Arboretum has a good list, and it does include some non-native plants too, but it does have a lot of native ones. So I'll drop that link into the chat.
Thank you, Carol. So while you're getting that link into the chat, we did have a few questions that were about your container gardens. And so the first question was, when you bury your containers with leaves, do you bury the container completely or just put leaves on top of the container?
Try to have it be complete. So in the fall, the leaf pile isn't very big yet because and so we'll place the pots there and then just dump leaves over the top, but so that they are going down in between the pots, so they're insulating the sides. In my experience, it's most important to be insulating the sides of the pots because that's where the roots are. But again, I do know people who don't bury them at all, and they leave them on their porch or their patio, and they don't have any problems. So one thing I will say is some people have told me, oh, well, my pots crack if I do that. I've never had a pot crack. I think that could happen if it's not draining well, and then water gets trapped in there and freezes, and as the ice expands, it could make the pot crack. So that's something to watch for. I luckily have never had that issue, but I think it's because the water is draining fine through the pots.
Thank you. So another question about the containers. Do you ever prune your potted natives? And do you fertilize?
I don't fertilize, although when I initially when I initially, put the plant in for the first time, depending on what species it is, I have added compost from our compost pile. But no, I have never fertilized after I've potted them, and I haven't ever pruned them, and I don't know why I haven't ever considered that. I do think that the species that I have, they're not tall, especially tall species. So I take that back. I do have another pot that wasn't shown in the video that has garden phlox, and I actually didn't prune it. A deer did that for me, and I was initially not happy about that, but it rebloomed. So I am going to prune that phlox back. Um, there's another exception. I have field horsetail in one of the pots. It was in the video kind of off to the side, but it's a horsetail, but it's a species that has finer foliage. And the pot that I have, it needs really wet soil. And the pot that I have it in, sometimes if I'm not vigilant about watering, it can dry up really quickly. But Mervyn Wallace of Missouri Wildflowers Nursery told me you can just trim it all back and it'll come right back. And it does. So sometimes sort of mid-season, even if it hasn't dried out, it can look kind of raggedy. I just get out the shears and cut it all off and it all comes back. But it depends on the species. Some species you can trim back and others it's better not to. But yeah, for the most part, I haven't, but it's because the species that I've chosen, I didn't feel like they needed it because they were pretty short.
Thank you. Um, Another question about maintenance of your yard as a whole. Do you water your garden beds?
I certainly water to begin with when when I first have planted them. And um, now, of course, this year here where I live in the central Missouri, we had so much rain through into July. Um, And then in August, it was really dry. So here's the thing. I probably normally wouldn't water, but we have these two white oak trees in the front, and one of them is on its way out, and I don't want to lose it. So I am watering in the front, but it's when in periods of extreme drought, but it's especially because I'm concerned about um, lengthening the life of especially one of the oak trees as much as I can. But ordinarily, in the prairie garden, I never water that. There's a few species in the Glade garden that are kind of under the eaves and they don't get rainfall, so I will sometimes water those.
Thank you. And related to the discussion about rainfall this year and the pattern of rain that we had, we also had a couple of questions. Simple answer: when did we film this yard tour?
It was in early June, wasn't it? It's like June 8th or 9th or something like
It
that, I
was,
think.
yeah, I think it was the second week of
Mhm.
June. Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so like the dry shady front yard wasn't a whole lot blooming then. There are things blooming like the golden groundsel like in April. Um and then a lot of some of the containers like the Indian pink that had already bloomed. So it was a little bit of a green lull in the front yard at that time. But then the prairie garden and the glade garden were had a lot of flowers.
And so folks get kind of oriented to your yard and understand kind of what they were seeing in the video. What direction does your house face, and what direction do the gardens face,
Yeah.
particularly along the driveway?
Um, so the so the front yard um is facing pretty much south. And so the prairie garden and the glade garden are facing east, a little bit southeast, and that's the sunniest part of our property. Um, because of the aspect and also because of there aren't large canopy trees there. And so that's why I was able to have prairie and glade garden there. One thing I did want to note, and I didn't mention this in the video, but in the front yard, I talked about the fringe tree when I was talking about smaller trees to plant. Because sometimes, if you have a small yard, you don't want a huge tree and or it's not appropriate to have a huge tree, right next to your house. Um, that tree is probably smaller than it could be because it's getting a lot of shade. And in fact, if you if you're in my yard looking at the tree, you can see the growth is sort of leaning towards the sun. But sometimes you work with what you have, and uh, sometimes there's certain things I want, even though that might have not have as much sun as it would in its native habitat. Conversely, there are other species like wild hydrangea that in the wild are in pretty intense shady conditions. Yet I learned from my colleague Scott Woodbury, who's planted them in full sun at Shaw Nature Reserve, that they do great in full sun. So it's strange. Sometimes some native plants in cultivation, in gardens, can thrive in growing conditions that are not quite what they are in, their native habitats.
Thank you, Carol. Another question, switching gears a little bit. How do you deal with destructive wildlife? The questioner mentions groundhogs. You referred to deer pressure earlier and in the video. What are ways to garden around or manage a garden with mammalian herbivores?
Yeah, it's a problem, a challenge that so many of us face. It can be so frustrating. So we do have deer pressure. It's I don't think as horrible as what some people have, but I use liquid fence and over you can buy it at hardware stores. And so this summer, it was June 2nd or I think something like that. My garden was on a garden tour with the local garden club. And let me tell you, I was out there like every night. You don't need to do it that often, nearly that often, but I was so paranoid. I didn't want the deer in there chomping on things before the tour. And I didn't have any herbivory, but and there are a number of products like this on the market. I've had really good luck with them. I think the recommended application is like even 2 days in a row, and then you can wait even a month, even if it rains. I have used it, as I said, more frequently than that. But I also there's certain species that I've like the plants in the mint family. I haven't had any herbivory of plants in the mint family. Um, Sometimes when the plants are young, I will put, or if it's a plant that I really want to protect, I will put a cage over it, or even like a tomato cage, and then I'll put a little bit of wire on top of it if it's a taller plant. Sometimes just for a particular period of time when I'm noticing like more deer coming through. Um, but I also as the plants have become more abundant and filled in, if they nibble a little bit here and there, I'm not so concerned about it. One new challenge I've had are chipmunks. They are digging all around my roots and digging in my container gardens. I'll go out there and I'll have just the spray of dirt everywhere. So I've been putting pebbles on top because they don't seem to like to dig through the pebbles. The other things, one day this might scandalize a number of people here. Yes, I do love chipmunks. They're adorable. But it was one day I came home to find our resident black rat snake by the driveway with a furry tail sticking out of its mouth. It had consumed a chipmunk. Thank you very much. So whatever you can do to promote snakes, predators of those kind of aggravating mammals, I highly recommend.
Those are great tips. deer and other animals are something that I think all of us who garden deal with. So thank you, Carol, for those. I speak from experience. So we also had a couple questions about the prairie garden section of your yard. So one question was just about how wide is that prairie garden? You mentioned you initially put in 80 containers, but give folks a sense of the dimensions of that space.
Sure. It's not uniformly, the width isn't uniform. It kind of is narrow and then widens out towards the street. The widest point I will say is about 4 or 5 feet wide, and then it narrows to about 2 feet wide. Um, one on that prairie garden, I really did want it to be more manicured than it looks now. And I often think, what would I have done differently? Sometimes I wish I had planted, honestly, like just 3 species. But then other times when I'm out there and I'm seeing all these different pollinators that are thriving because of the plant diversity, then I think, I'm pretty happy with it. So, but I do think there's a lot of value in really reining in, and sometimes you can make really great visual impact with, in certain areas, a lower diversity plant palette, depending on what your objectives are. Of course, diversity of plant species is so important ecologically, but there may be situations where design-wise, you might think about having more individual plants of fewer species. And sometimes I wish I had done that there, but other times, like I say, I do enjoy the diversity as well, especially for the insects that depend on or benefit from those plants.
So another question on the topic of diversity and managing the plant diversity of that prairie garden. What were the aggressive grasses that you mentioned that you had to manage in the prairie section?
Switchgrass, little blue, those are the two that were. And, again, I could have managed it better if I had just been a bit more vigilant when they were younger plants and just, pull them out. Um, I was successful. There was one area kind of right near the driveway with a lot of grass. And I thought, I just want something else there. So I was able to dig it out with a mattock. Wasn't easy, because you'll have those really, pretty dense, root, crowns, but I was able to get them out, and I wasn't sure if they'd grow back, but they didn't. And I planted some scutellaria there. Because I just wanted some more color there. So, it is possible to do that. But, that was, my son was young then, and I don't know, I just had a lot going on. And I just didn't get to it. But in hindsight, um, I could have managed it better, I think, and it wouldn't have become so dominant. And again, like I said in the video, um, you might scale back, the percent of grasses that you get, and because they do tend to fill in quickly.
I appreciate all of the wisdom that you have in hindsight about the prairie garden. Um, Now, we also had a couple of questions about vines.
Mhm.
And so one was, can you plant the yellow passion flower on arbors? So you have it growing on your fence, but are there other structures that you might be able to use to support that vine?
I would think you could, anything vertical would work. I don't see why it would, I think you could use anything. Well, one thing I will say is, think about what you want to see, and what do you enjoy looking at? And so, it is like a more delicate flower, and so, you might want to have it in a place just where you can, see it, where it's not going to maybe get overwhelmed by something else. So in nature, I've seen I've usually always seen yellow passion flower growing at the edge of glades and open woodlands, kind of right in that transition. I see them growing up trees or, kind of growing on other vegetation is how I tend to see it. So I think it could grow on anything.
Right. We will also include a resource in our follow-up email about native vines too. So you'll be able to read some additional information if you are interested in gardening with some native vines. There was also a question about Dutchman's pipevine. Is there any plant that is similar to Dutchman's pipevine that is less aggressive, but also has a wildlife benefit, like feeding the pipevine swallowtail caterpillars?
Hmm. Drawing a blank right now. Maybe others who are listening might have ideas. Um, I mean, they're all going to have wildlife benefit, right? I mean, but to what degree? And if I do think that pipevine is cool just because it, it, that is if the pipevine swallowtail can find it, at least in my case, I have a lot. So I can, see them a lot. I can see the butterflies and the caterpillars a lot, and that's really cool. Um, Similar to one that has rounded leaves is I think it's well, there's moon seed, and then there's another moon. Um, oh boy, I'm drawing a blank, but we'll find it and we can put it in the uh the the email. I see somebody put passion flower. So the purple passion flower is absolutely beautiful. The leaves are not rounded, but they're lobed, and I think the leaves are really attractive. It is aggressive though. I mean, it is quite aggressive, but so is the Dutchman's pipe. Um, Anybody else have any suggestions? What is that? A moon seed, and oh, there's another one. I can't remember it right off, but I'll try to think of it here.
Yeah, we also had someone suggest coral honeysuckle, and then of course there's also yellow honeysuckle, which are serve as host plants and are also relatively well behaved as native vines.
Yeah. Oh, the other. Oh. One thing I did. So it's Carolina moon seed, Cocculus carolinus, and I haven't uh, gardened with it. Another vine I do want to mention. It's so common. Some people don't like it, but Virginia creeper. Now, it is, would really need a strong support, but I think it's kind of an underrated plant. One, I think it's gorgeous, but also in the fall, I mean, the foliage is amazing, and the flowers are just support so many bees, and the berries, which are ripe now. I have I have Virginia creeper purposefully growing into a tree, and it's hanging down, and just I have all these berries, and then there'll be bluebirds that just cling to it and eat those berries. So that and it's a host plant for a number of moths, I believe, and maybe there's a Virginia creeper sphinx. There's a sphinx moth. That's a Virginia creeper sphinx moth, I believe. But again, it's aggressive, and you would need a strong support. But I just love it. I love Virginia creeper.
All right, we have just time for a couple of more questions. These are two sort of general questions to conclude the presentation on. So the first is, have any neighbors complained about the native gardens in your yard not being a mowed lawn?
No, but I mean, we do have some lawn in the front. We do. And we do mow it. It's I say lawn, it's mostly like Korean Lespedeza that was there before we moved there. Um, because as I said, I really want the front to look more conventional because I just want to win people over who might find that sort of a reassuring look. My neighbor across the street, and I don't know if I influenced her or she had her own influences, but she has planted lots of native plants. I've had compliments from people. I've had people stop by and say, "Oh, my grandmother had a plant like that." Um, I also, especially for the garden tour that my yard was part of this summer, but also I did want them anyway. Is I bought many dozens of the Grow Native Wild Ones plant signs, and I have them, like along the driveway, or excuse me, along this, in the beds along sidewalks, and that has really again, help people understand that it's intentional, raised awareness about the diversity of plants. There was a man who came to, oh yes, work on our sewer yeah, and a couple weeks ago when he walked up and he said, "Those signs are really professional." So he was impressed by them too. So no, I haven't had any complaints, but more and more interest all the time, I think.
And in our follow-up email, we will include links for those plant tags that are a collaboration between Wildland St. Louis and Grow Native, as well as our Grow Native garden signs. All right, Carol, one last question, which I think is a fun one to conclude on. What has been your favorite or most exciting insect find in your garden?
Oh my. Oh, that's a really good question. There have been several. Um, well, this was memorable, not necessarily in a great way, but we had a wheel bug once that my son at the time was about 3, was very enamored with, picked it up, and it really gave him a painful bite. So he learned. um, Honestly, the pipevine caterpillars I just love because I'm able to see the whole life cycle, and you really feel a sense of accomplishment that you're helping to raise all these caterpillars because it was, a direct choice that you made. And the butterflies are just so extremely beautiful. Oh, wait, I do have another. One time I saw a caterpillar. Well, I was out looking at my partridge pea, and it was like August, September, where the pods are ripening, and they're kind of greenish yellow, and they eventually, turn black. But at the time, they were like yellow and green. And I was looking at them, and then I'm really looking closely, and I see this pod that I realize it is not a pod. It was the caterpillar of the cloudless sulfur butterfly, for which the um, partridge pea and wild senna is a host plant. And it was so cool because, and maybe others who are on the video will, I'm sure, or on the webinar will know more than I, but it was mimicking the pod at that point in the pod's development, right? So that's pretty cool. So anyway, I cut that, I brought it into the kitchen, hid it on the counter, and I was able to watch it, continue eating and then form a chrysalis. So that was really, really cool. Um, yeah. But the thing is, you're just always learning more. There's always something new. There's always something new. So, just being able to have nature close at hand as well, um, is so appealing. Being able to see those insects just right outside my door. I did want to I wanted to just say one, fantastic job, Emily, on making the video. And I want to thank just all of the people that I've worked with that, I don't feel particularly that I have a lot of wisdom. I just feel that I've benefited so much from my colleagues and other native plant enthusiasts. I've learned so much from Scott Woodbury and Alan Branhagen and um, just so many other people who are share our passion and our love for critically important native landscaping. So I just so appreciate everything I've learned from others who do native landscaping.
All right. Thank you so much, Carol, for opening your garden to us today and for those thoughtful remarks right here at the end about how it really takes all of us. Thank you. And thank you also to Emily for producing the recording and everything you do behind the scenes for videos and webinars just like this. As mentioned before, this webinar has been recorded and an email will be sent to you tomorrow with the links and other helpful resources shared. Before we sign off for today, I have a couple of announcements about upcoming in-person and online events that you won't want to miss. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar on October 8th at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time when we will explore bats of the Midwest, ecology, conservation, and prairie connections with wildlife biologist Jeanette Bailey. It's sure to be a spooky start to October. Next, mark your calendars for October 22nd, when we will host several leaders from Grow Native Gardens of Excellence as they share stormwater management features and plants in their gardens. As a reminder, we have two more plant sales happening this fall, one in St. Louis, Missouri tomorrow, and one in New Franklin, Missouri on October 18th. Find details about those all over our socials and on our websites. Next, registration is ongoing for our MPF Friends of Quiver River State Park Grasslands Workday, happening October 19th near Troy, Missouri. The workday will be held with a minimum of 5 volunteers, which I think we've already hit, and a maximum of 25 volunteers by MPF Vice President of Science and Management, Bruce Schutte. Please sign up by Thursday, October 16th. Finally, our annual Evening on the Prairie and member meeting event is happening this Saturday, September 27th at MPF's Golden Prairie near Golden City, Missouri. We are proud to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of Golden Prairie's designation as a National Natural Landmark. And although the ticketed dinner is sold out, all are welcome to come out for free guided tours and complimentary social hour with free beverages. Find the agenda online at moprairie.org. All of these events and more can be registered for at our website under the Events tab. And this concludes today's broadcast. Thank you, and everyone have a great evening.
Thank you, Amanda. And I just want to also say, Amanda, thank you so much for your superb professionalism and effectiveness at organizing, promoting, and these webinars, and your just excellent delivery and sharing of information. I really appreciate it, and it's really wonderful to work with both of you.
Oh, thank you so much, Carol. Keeping that in the recording. All right. We'll talk to you guys all later. Have a great night.
Have a great
Bye.
night.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.